Good day everyone, my name is Laura. Please allow me to introduce the other members of my group, Ravita, Samati, Jamelia, and Nicole. The purpose of this presentation is to depict what our group would deem the ideal personality for a young person living in the post-COVID world. For some, the pandemic may have been challenging. For others, whilst horrified at the death toll, it was a downtime they always hoped for but could never get. With certainty, it affected us all. The theories provided throughout this presentation will possibly explain why and how changes in personality occur in our fictional character. We hope you find it informative. Enjoy! Hey everyone, let's meet John. John is a 32-year-old male and the head of operations at GTN Limited. John likes to hang out every Friday night on the town. A lot of John's acquaintances hang around him because he pays for their drinks and food. They don't really like to spend time with John. John doesn't have meaningful, intimate relationships. His relationships are often fleeting and transactional. John's co-workers also don't care for John's personality. They think John is demanding and insensitive and that his behavior is absolutely distasteful. Everyone else at the office gets along and they work as a team. John, however, is very self-reliant and doesn't ask for help when he needs it. He thinks everyone else is incompetent. He also refuses to assist others. Then the COVID-19 virus hit, but John continued to interact with his fake friends without precaution. Unfortunately, John contracted the virus and was forced to isolate without support from anyone. Then the lockdown happened, and John had to work from home. The company, in attempts to save money, downsized and let John's secretary go. She was the buffer between John and his co-workers. After trying to get things done on his own for quite some time, John realized he needed help. His work began to suffer. He figured he should become more open to getting to know the only people he interacted with on a daily basis, the very people he didn't like, his co-workers. John worked very hard on his shortcomings for months. Now, John doesn't only like his co-workers, they like him in return. He helps and accepts help. With the improvement in his communication skills and his willingness to be open with others, John clicked immediately with Sarah from IT, and he formed a deep connection with her. In addition, John learned to appreciate his time at home. He struck that perfect balance between going out with friends and being content at home on a Friday night. Drinking is no longer part of his weekly routine. We can definitely see that things are looking up for John.
Now, before we delve into the theoretical analysis of our character John, it is important for us to have a foundational understanding of what personality is, or more so, what it constitutes of. By general definition, personality is the unique, relatively enduring internal and external aspects of a person's character that influence behavior in different situations. Oftentimes, we use the word personality when we are describing the likes or dislikes, fears or virtues, and strengths or weaknesses of either ourselves or others. Thus, in its simplest form, the word personality refers to the idea of human uniqueness, which are our special abilities and features that distinguishes us from each other. Now, our personality does not remain absolute or fixed throughout the entirety of our lives, as various factors such as developmental needs and environmental circumstances all contribute towards shaping the person who we are at various stages in our lives. Therefore, considering the many social shifts placed upon us during the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic, the dynamic of our personality has inevitably been altered within the post-COVID world, as in the case of our character John. As such, we shall now move on to our theoretical analysis of John.
First, we must understand what are traits. Traits are relatively permanent reaction tendencies that are the basic structural units of the personality. According to Raymond Cattell, a person will behave in response to a given stimuli situation. Cattell believed that traits are formed through biological assessments, daily life experiences, and through our environmental situations. At the age of 32, John would be categorized into Cattell's maturity stage of personality development as a young adult. Maturity deals with the satisfaction an adult will experience with their career, marriage, and family. As such, his traits have been highly influenced by his motivation and behaviors surrounding his career. Here are 3 traits that Cutterell's theory helped to explain personality. Firstly, dynamic traits. Dynamic traits are the driving force of behavior that influences our motivations, interests, and ambitions. John's profession was very important to him at this stage in his life, since he believed that having money would make him feel secure with his lifestyle, since he enjoyed spending money. Because of his desire for professional achievement, he was a competitive and hard worker who preferred to work alone. His motivation to succeed in his career is reflected in his behavior as a self-sufficient man. Secondly, environmental mold traits. Environmental mold traits derive from influences in our social and physical environments. These traits are learned characteristics and behaviors that impose a pattern on the personality. John's work environment affected his behavior. While he worked at the office, he did not communicate often with others nor believed in asking other colleagues for help. When the COVID-19 pandemic forced John to work from home and the company downsized, he no longer had a secretary to act as a buffer, and he had no choice but to deal with IT and other department employees. The more John interacted with his co-workers, the more he learned to ask for assistance when he needed it and to assist others in return. Through the influence of his co-workers, he became better at communicating and being helpful, essentially becoming very dependable. Thirdly, temperament traits. Temperament traits determine our general behavioral patterns for reacting to people and situations in our environment. John was initially standoffish at the workplace because his main focus was getting his work completed. He didn't communicate with his co-workers as a result of this because he believed he could do everything himself and didn't like asking for help or advice. But once he began working from home and learned how stress-free and calm he was at home and how pleasant it was to interact with colleagues and others, he became more easygoing in his everyday interactions and attitudes towards others because he realized that his standoffish behavior and being extremely competitive at his job did not benefit him.
According to Skinner, behavior is controlled and modified by variables that are external to the organism. However, although external stimuli and reinforcers are responsible for shaping and controlling behavior, we have the ability to use what Skinner calls self-control. According to Skinner, self-control is the ability to exert control over the variables that determine our behavior or acting to alter the impact of external events. John was a prior socialite who found enjoyment in partying and social events. Engaging in these behaviors during the pandemic led to him contracting the deadly disease. He knew if he didn't limit his partying and careless social interactions, that he would once again face the consequences of these actions. These distressing consequences inevitably triggered a sense of apprehension within him. He maintained this thereafter during his experience of the virus itself. However, apprehensiveness developed into a characteristic of John's, and within the post-COVID world, he oftentimes distanced himself from large social gatherings if he deemed it unnecessary being there. Ideally, this trait has henceforth protected him from recontracting the virus, as he aims to be highly cautious. He ultimately became apprehensive with regard to socially interacting in the post-COVID world. The result that this experience had on his personality can be explained by the self-control technique of aversive stimulation. Theoretically, this shift in John's personality trait can be accounted for by Skinner's concept. Aversive stimulation is a technique of self-control involving unpleasant or repugnant consequences, which lead to changes in behavior. Therefore, because of John's experience with the aversive consequences of the virus, which in his case were severe coughing, fever, being hospitalized briefly, and essentially having a near-death experience, this triggered a shift in his personality. Given that John began distancing himself from social events and spaces such as parties, clubs, and bars, he consequently began cutting back on his levels of alcohol consumption, thus resulting in the acquaintances who previously associated with him for their own social and financial gain to lessen their interactions with him. This all resulted in him embracing and appreciating his introverted side. He was able to strike a balance between his social engagements on some occasions and finding enjoyment in his own company at home on other occasions. John's personality shifted from being mostly extroverted to being more ambivert. This is the tendency to display characteristics of introversion and extroversion in approximately equal degrees. This aspect of his personality was as a result of the stimulus avoidance technique mentioned in Skinner's theory. This is the self-control technique which involves removing oneself from external variables that affect one's behavior. This technique is known as stimulus avoidance. By John removing himself from various stimuli that affect his behavior, such as alcohol, excessive partying, and certain acquaintances, he saw a change in his behavior and ultimately in his personality in the post-COVID world. Subsequently, the shifts in John's external environment triggered his realization of the importance of having genuine relationships and connections with others when faced with feelings of isolation, thus encouraging his need to develop healthier personal relationships with those who are actively a part of his day-to-day life, that being his work colleagues.
Erikson's theory was often criticized for being vague about the cause of the individual's development. In this scenario, John's progression in wanting to develop meaningful relations with his co-workers and Sarah is triggered by his isolation due to the lockdown caused by COVID-19. Erikson's theory described the effects of social experiences over the course of a person's life. He was fascinated by how human development and growth were influenced by social contact and connections. Between the ages of 18 and 40, the sixth stage in Erikson's psychosocial development theory, isolation versus intimacy, takes place. Major tension can occur around this time, as we strive with varied degrees of success to form longer-term commitments outside of our family. John was able to develop two new traits. These included openness, and he became more committed. Prior to COVID, John was not a fan of his co-workers. Due to COVID's restrictions, he was now limited to associating with them. As a result, he had to choose between isolation or adapting to the situation of forming relationships with his co-workers. Instead of isolating himself, he decided to attempt to be more open-minded and build positive working relationships. He improved his communication skills because of this. John is now able to communicate more effectively and efficiently within his professional relationships. In his personal connection, John has become more committed. He was able to communicate with Sarah on a more personal level after learning to be more open about his thoughts and emotions, and he has taken the initiative to go on a date with her. Erikson felt that developing close, dedicated relationships with others was essential, and John has progressed to the point where he has begun to divulge more private details about himself with Sarah. He is going to embark on an exploration into this relationship, which could lead to a longer-term commitment.
Our version of John's ideal personality supports Cattell's theory, which states that traits are configured through our environmental situations, such as a lockdown, among other things. John went from being tense to easygoing. John's ideal personality also supports Skinner's concept of aversive stimulation, which posits that unpleasant consequences, such as contracting COVID-19, triggered a shift in John's personality. He went from being an extrovert to an ambivert. Our version of John's ideal personality additionally supports Erikson's beliefs regarding the sixth stage of development, being isolation versus intimacy, in which John struggled with loneliness during the lockdown, and he began to seek fulfilling relationships around him. John went from being closed-minded to open-minded. If we were to apply the big 5 factors, being openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, John, with his post-COVID-19 personality, would score on the higher end in all factors except neuroticism. In conclusion, we've come to understand Albert Camus when he said, "Psychology is action, not thinking about oneself. We continue to shape our personality all our life. To know oneself, one should assert oneself." We hope that you found our presentation informative, and we thank you for watching.